Well, good morning. Nice to see all of you here today. I understand you're going to be celebrating Christmas in a few days. Wonderful time of year, isn't it? You know, I've been hanging around Christmas from the beginning, but I suspect many of you are not too familiar with me. Sometimes I feel like the father of the bride. Nobody pays attention to him, but he has to pay for the whole affair. I want you to know that Christmas cost me a lot. So I thought I'd tell you my story this morning. I suppose I should introduce myself. My name is Joseph Davison. I was born in Bethlehem, but I guess my claim to fame is that I'm a descendant of King David, Israel's greatest king. He's the one that united the country together, brought us unparalleled time of economic prosperity and military prosperity. Of course, when I was born, David had been dead almost 1,000 years. And there were hundreds, there were thousands of people who could claim their lineage back to David, but still it was something that I was proud of. Well, when I became a young man, I went up to a small town in the northern part of Israel, a place called Nazareth. I'm surprised some of you have heard of Nazareth. It was so small that it used to be the butt of jokes. People would say, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" But I didn't go to Nazareth because it was a great city. I went there to practice my trade. You see, I'm a carpenter. And I guess that tells you something about me, doesn't it? I like to work with my hands. I like things that I can touch and feel and measure and cut. I live in a world of cause and effect. Things have to make sense to me. You know, wood has a kind of spirit to it, if you will. Some wood is as hard as metal and other wood is as pliable as clay. But wood has integrity. I like that in wood. I like that in people. But it was in Nazareth that I met my Mary. I still remember the first time I saw her. I was in the marketplace getting my food, you know, and I looked over and what's that saying you have? Love at first sight? I just, it was it. I couldn't keep my eyes off of her, and I noticed the way that she interacted with her family and with the people in the marketplace, and when she laughed, her whole face lit up. I guess I was staring at her. I know you're not supposed to do that, but I couldn't help it. I was so taken back by her, and she looked over at me. I got a little embarrassed, but she smiled at me. And right there, I knew she was the one for me. So I didn't waste any time. I had my parents call her parents, and they arranged a meeting, and the families got together, and before you know it, we had an official introduction, and we started seeing each other, and of course, we were never alone, believe me, and after a short period of time, we were engaged to be married. Now, our engagements are not like your engagements. Our engagements are much more serious. They could last a year or more. It was a time when the families got together and made sure everybody got along. They worked out a dowry. They'd even send someone down to the temple in Jerusalem to make sure that the people who wanted to get married weren't too closely related, because in a country as small as ours and as compact as ours, sometimes that would happen. But folks, they were the best years of my life, getting to know Mary. You know, she was this unique combination of girl and woman. She was like 16 years old when we first met, but she was mature way beyond her years. And she had this ability to put down her thoughts in words. She would write poems, and she'd turn those poems into songs, and some of her songs were simply magnificent. But it was a time when we got together and really developed a close relationship. We both fell deeply in love with one another. It was a time when I dreamed. I dreamed of the family that we would have, the children that we would have. I'm a carpenter. I'd build her a house and the furniture, and it was just so wonderful. It was just so wonderful. It's funny how sometimes your dreams can turn into nightmares, almost overnight. I noticed that she had been quiet, becoming withdrawn, and by this time I knew her very, very well. I knew something was really bothering her. And so I went to her and I said, Mary, what's wrong? Please talk to me. Tell me about it. We're going to be married. We're going to spend our lives together. Tell me about it. She said, no, she couldn't talk about it. She couldn't talk about it. And she didn't want to talk about it. I had to go away for a couple of days to do some work in another city. And when I was away, I was just beside myself. I couldn't think. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Couldn't concentrate on my job. And when I got back, I was beside myself. I said, Mary, don't lock me out. You got to tell me what's wrong. I thought maybe somebody in her family didn't like somebody in my family, or they couldn't work out a dowry, or maybe they found something in the temple that said we shouldn't be married. I said, Mary, it doesn't matter what it is. We're in love with each other. We can work it out. She finally looked at me with tears in her eyes. She said she was pregnant. Pregnant of all the things I had thought was bothering her. That never entered my mind. That never entered my mind. I said, what? Pregnant? What are you talking about? How could that happen? You were never alone. Who would do such a thing? How could you let that happen? You got to be kidding me. Explain this to me. What's going on? What's going on? And then she told me this story. She told me that an angel of the Lord appeared to her and told her that she was going to be the mother of God's Messiah. And then she said the Spirit of the Lord came over her and placed a baby in her womb, and that she was still a virgin. I was like, what are you talking about? I couldn't believe that she would say this to me. It was one thing to destroy my dreams, crash them against the rocks. It's another thing to treat me like a fool and tell me some ridiculous story. I was furious. I left. I said, that's it. This is over with, because I knew it was going to happen. As soon as she started to show signs that she was pregnant, everybody thought that I was going to do it. My reputation would be destroyed. So I said, you know what? The next day, I'm going to the elders at the gate. I'm going to explain everything to them. I'm going to say I had nothing to do with this. And I'm going to get this over. When I was younger and I was in school, I remember studying the law. And I remember that they had a punishment for adultery. It was stoning, death by stoning. And when I first read that, I thought that was kind of harsh and cruel. Now, we didn't follow that anymore. But now I understood why they had such a severe punishment for that. So that was it. I'm getting it over tomorrow. But I couldn't do that. Even though she destroyed my dreams and broke my heart, I still loved her. So I decided that I would just break it off quietly and move to another town. Mary knew she couldn't stay. She went to see her cousin Elizabeth and her husband Zachariah. Elizabeth was also pregnant, and they could take care of her. She'd be safe there. Folks, the next couple of days, weeks, I don't know. It was a living hell for me. I just kept thinking over and over in my mind, how could this happen? Why could this happen? Who did this? How could she let this happen? I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't concentrate on my work. I had that sick feeling in my stomach, and the little sleep that I did get was restless. It was terrible. It was terrible. And then one night I had a dream. I was in a dark place. I really was in a dark place. And there was this light up ahead. And the light started to come towards me, and it got bigger and brighter and bigger and brighter and bigger and brighter. And then boom, all of a sudden there was an angel in front of me. An angel standing in front of me. Now, just as a side note, you know how sometimes you guys say, oh, wouldn't it be cool to see an angel? Like just one angel? Like, wouldn't that be really nice? Let me warn you. Be careful what you wish for. Because I've seen an angel. They're big. And they're intimidating. What's that saying you have? Shaking in your boots? I was shaking in my sandals. And the first thing he said to me was, "Fear not." I thought, well, that's a good start. And then he looked right through to my soul. And he said, "Joseph Davison, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife. Because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. And you will name him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." And then just as soon as he appeared, he was gone. When I woke up from that dream, I felt like this burden had been lifted from me. And then I thought to myself, my Mary, the person I love, this poor little girl has to go through this alone. She told me the truth. Everything she said was true, and I didn't believe her. I abandoned her. So I got my stuff together as soon as I could, and I ran down to see her at Elizabeth and Zacharias, and I apologized to her. I pleaded with her. I told her how sorry I was. I said it would never happen again. I begged for her forgiveness. I begged for her forgiveness. And of course, she forgave me. And right then and there, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes, and I took her to be my wife. We were married right there. And I swear to you, in all that time, I never touched her. You know, a wise man once said, you have to know what time it is in life. You have to know what's going on around you. You have to be aware of your situation. And so I thought to myself, hey, you know what? God's in the middle of this. No problem. Smooth sailing the whole way. God's not going to let anything happen. This is all part of God, right? Everything is going to go smooth. I told you I was a carpenter, not a theologian or a philosopher. You couldn't have imagined how wrong I was. Almost at the beginning, as soon as she started to show that she was pregnant, it started. The dirty innuendos, the laughter, the gossip, the slander behind our backs. And then, she's 8.5, 9 months pregnant. She's due any day. All of a sudden, we get notification from Rome, an edict from Caesar Augustus, that he wants to take a census so he can find out how many people are in his kingdom for taxation purposes. Of all times, he wants to do that now. Now, I understand in your day the census takers come to you. Well, that never occurred to Caesar Augustus. All the men had to go back to their birthplace, which meant I had to go down to Bethlehem. Now, I'm living in Nazareth, and I have to go to Bethlehem. That's about 100 miles. And I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to do? Yeah, the easiest thing is to just go down there and get this over with, but wait a minute, wait a minute. I left Mary once in my life, and I'm never going to do that again. And she may give birth while I'm gone. So I'm not going to do that. But then I thought, am I going to take her with me? It's going to take us a week to get down there. What if she has the baby while we're traveling? Folks, just to put a little meat on the bones for you, because I know you read these stories in your Bible, and you think we just hopped in the car and we went down there and came back. So here's what I'd like you to do. I understand that you guys have these, what are they called, summer vacations? I don't know what they are. Somebody told me that you guys get some time off in the summer. You don't work. I don't know how you manage to finagle that. But in any event, this summer, you know what I'd like you to do? Do me a favor. I want you to take a ride from here to, what is your state capital, Hartford? Yeah, take a ride from here to Hartford and back. That's about 100 miles. That's about the same distance that we had to go from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Could you do that for me? But you got to do it on a donkey. Oh, and you can't follow any major highways. You got to go through the paths in the woods. And oh yeah, you have to be 9 months pregnant. That's what we had to go through. But of course, I was confident that when we got to Bethlehem, my relatives would be able to put us up. Yeah, right. We get there, the place is packed. They had already taken more people in than they could. They had no room for us. I went to the inns, they were full. I went to the caravanseries where the caravans would stop, they were full. And nobody would give up their spot, not even for a pregnant woman. I looked everywhere. Everywhere, up and down, all over. I could find nothing. Until finally, I found a cave on the outskirts of town where a farmer would keep his animals. A stinky, filthy cave. Better than being out in the elements, so I took it. Folks, that first night when we were there, we were all alone. It was just me and Mary. And I'm thinking, really? This is what the plan is? And then, of course, when Jesus was born, I'm a carpenter, I'm not a doctor. I didn't know what to do. Poor Mary had to be both midwife and mother giving birth at the same time. When he was born, I cut the cord, I wrapped him in cloth, I put some hay in the feeding trough. It was better than putting him on the disgusting floor. Folks, we were all alone. There were no marching bands. There were no fireworks. There were no voices from heaven saying, "Here's my son." There was nothing. We were alone. Yeah, later on some shepherds came and said they'd seen a heavenly choir, but you know about shepherds. Mary ate that up. I don't know. It certainly didn't meet my expectations on how I thought all this was going to happen. Well, anyway, we decided to stay in Bethlehem. Didn't want to go back to Nazareth. I don't know, we were there about 2 years. Then we had some visitors. One day, these 3 kings showed up, these wise men from a faraway land called Persia, wherever that is. And they were stargazers. They'd search the stars and read the stars and the paths to try to predict the future. And they had seen something 2 years ago that they had never in their most wildest imagination ever imagined they would see. A new star was born. A new star was born. And they knew that was a revelation from heaven that some great event was taking place. And they determined that it was the birth of a new king, a great leader. And through all their calculations, I'm not sure how that works, but they determined that it was over Israel. So they went to Jerusalem, saw our half-breed king, Herod, and told him about it. Of course, he got nervous, worrying about his throne. But then he called in his scholars, and they determined that some prophecy in our scriptures talked about a king being born in Bethlehem. So they had come to Bethlehem, and they had done their research, and they determined that star was Jesus' star. Now, folks, I know that you sing these things called Christmas carols, and you have a song, We Three Kings. Folks, they were royalty. They were kings. There wasn't just 3 guys that showed up on camels. They were kings. They had an entourage. They had animals. They had hundreds, thousands of people with them. They had an army with them, hundreds of heavily armed soldiers. They showed up at our door, and they wanted to see Jesus. And here's Mary. She brings out Jesus. He's just a toddler. And every single one of them got down on their hands and knees and worshiped him. What do you do with that? What do you do with that? And they gave him gifts. Gold. Gold. I'd never seen gold before. Gold. Expensive perfume. Incense. And then they left. I was warned in a dream the next day that we were supposed to leave immediately because Jesus' life was in danger. So I told Mary, we packed up and we left. We went to Egypt. We were there for about 2 years, and I looked at that gold and that incense and that expensive perfume as a provision from God. I was a poor Jewish carpenter. Egyptians had no time for me. The only way we survived was from that gold and the incense and the perfume. And then I was told in a dream it was okay to go back. So we went back to Bethlehem. We went back to Bethlehem. It wasn't long before we started hearing these horrible, horrible stories about what had happened right after we left. Herod, that butcher sent in the army, and they slaughtered every male child 2 years and younger. They were looking for Jesus. Yes, we were so happy that Jesus was safe. But we heard these horrible stories. We couldn't have imagined the pain and suffering that these families went through. Part of the plan? What did they call it? The slaughter of the innocents. So we couldn't stay. We went back to Nazareth. And almost immediately it started. You know, they never let Jesus live it down. Even the adults, they'd say stuff like, oh, there's Jesus. We know who our father is. We all have one father, but Jesus, he has two fathers. He's got Joseph, and then he's got his real father. They never let him live it down. But he took it in stride. Jesus was a good kid. He was a good kid. Folks, Jesus was a normal, average, everyday kid. He didn't run around performing miracles. Do you understand what I'm saying? He was a normal, average, everyday kid. He'd go out and play with his friends. He'd fall down. He'd skin his knee. It would bleed. He'd come in crying. We'd fix it. Just like all the other kids. Sometimes when he couldn't sleep at night, Mary would hold him in her arms and sing her songs to him. And he'd fall asleep in her arms. Of course, there was this one time. So every year we'd go down to Jerusalem for the Passover feast. A whole bunch of us, big caravan, we'd go down, parents in the front with the animals, then the children in the back. So we'd go down there, we'd spend a week there, have a wonderful time. And then we're on the way back. We're a day or two out of Jerusalem, and I say to Mary, I go, have you seen Jesus? And she goes, no, I thought he was with you. I go, what are you talking about? I thought he was with you. We go back to where the children are playing. There's no Jesus. I say, what, did we lose the Son of God? How do you do that? So we got to run back to Jerusalem. We got to climb up the mountain. We got to retrace our steps. We got to go down every street we ever been down. We got to go to every bazaar and every inn and all the people's houses that we visit. And we find no Jesus. He's not anywhere. And we start thinking the worst happened. He was kidnapped. Where is he? We don't know where he is. We're beside ourselves. Finally, we didn't know what else to do, so we said, well, we'll go to the temple and pray. Suppose we should have done that first. But when we get there, there's Jesus. And around him are the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the teachers of the law. And they're asking him questions, and he's giving them answers, and he's asking them questions that they don't know how to answer. And they're amazed at the wisdom that this child has. They don't understand it. They can't believe it. And of course, we show up and we're like, he's with us. And we finally get Jesus, and we hug him, and we kiss him. We explain to him how worried we were. I said, Jesus, why didn't you tell us you were going to be here? He looks up with his innocent eyes. And he says, didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house? Now, I know when you hear that in a sermon on Sunday, you go, oh, isn't that cute? But when you hear that from your 12-year-old son, you're not quite sure how to take that. But Jesus was a good kid. And he grew to be a fine young man. Folks, I put my thumbprint on Jesus. I taught him to be a carpenter. In fact, people referred to him as a carpenter. I taught him that. He was a good one. He could cut that wood straight. He could make that yoke for the oxen that was so light. I taught him that. You see, folks, here's why I wanted to share my story with you this Christmas. When God the Father was up in heaven looking for a place to put his Son, he chose me and Mary. Normal, average, everyday couple, just like you guys. Now, some of you are like my Mary. I call you the blessed ones. From the moment that first angel appeared to her, that was it. She believed, no questions asked. She didn't sway to the right or to the left. She just believed, and everything that happened, she took it in stride. Some of you are like her. You're the blessed ones. But others of you are more like me. I question things. I struggle sometimes. I need to see things. I need to touch things and feel things. I live in a world of cause and effect. I have to measure things. Things have to make sense to me, or I have trouble with it. Sometimes I believed my doubts, and I doubted my beliefs. I believed my doubts and I doubted my beliefs. And it was during those times that I just faithed it through. I just faithed it through. I did the best I could. Sometimes it was just holding on to Scripture. For example, one time it was Isaiah, one of our Old Testament prophets, prophesied that the virgin will be with child. The virgin would be with child. I lived through that. Another prophet said the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. Born in Bethlehem. How did we ever get to Bethlehem? Caesar, the edict, out of nowhere. Another prophet said, I called my son out of Egypt. We went to Egypt. I lived through all of that. I held on to it. I faithed it through. And you know what? That's what God used. That's what God used. Folks, I'm a regular, old, average, everyday Joe. Joe Davison. Just like many of you, who sometimes believed his doubts and doubted his beliefs, but faithed it through. And that's what God used. And if he used that with me, he can use that with you. So anyway, that's my story. I thought I would share that with you. You might want to think about that when you're celebrating your Christmas. And oh, by the way, Jesus, he really is the Savior of the world.